Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They thought it was just an old ranch bridge, an eyesore blocking their perfect suburban view. But when HOA President Mandy Halloran crossed the wrong line, she didn't just spark a neighborhood feud. She triggered a federal storm no one saw coming. This wasn't over. This was war. They say every man has his castle. Mine just happens to be 800 acres wide, surrounded by Texas brushland, and equipped with a bridge that could survive a tank column. My name is Grayson Rivers, 44 years old, Army contractor and logistics specialist for the Department of Defense. I've spent the better part of 2 decades designing and maintaining critical supply corridors across some of the world's most unpredictable terrain. But funny enough, the fiercest battlefield I'd face wasn't halfway across the globe. It was in my own backyard. My property sits about 5 miles off a county road, nestled between forest and a quiet river bend. The land's been in my family since the late 1800s. Over the years, I've built it up into what I call a quiet zone, a home, a secure garage, an equipment barn, and, most importantly, a reinforced bridge crossing the river that splits the South Ridge. To the average eye, it looks like an old farm overpass. Rust-colored beams, gravel-packed surface, a little overkill for what seems like a ranch crossing. But it's not just a bridge. It's an officially registered strategic logistical element designated under the Red Dagger Logistics Corridor, a fallback route for emergency deployment, occasionally used for low-visibility military transports. Once every few months, a convoy might pass through. Disguised trailers, blackout lights. No questions asked. The kind of stuff we don't talk about over beer. Most of my neighbors over the years respected the boundary. They'd wave from afar, curious maybe, but smart enough not to poke the bear. That changed last spring when the subdivision to the south, a grid of newly minted McMansions called Willowbrook Heights, voted in a new HOA president, Mandy Halloran, though most around here started calling her Karen before summer hit. She came in hot. Emails, flyers, beautification plans. She wasn't even subtle about it. Within 2 weeks of taking over, she'd already begun surveying the perimeter of the HOA's jurisdiction, which, unsurprisingly, led her straight to my fence line. I didn't pay much attention at first. Bureaucrats come and go. But Mandy had the persistence of a squirrel and the attitude of a federal auditor with a grudge. One morning, I caught her standing near the river just past the south fence. She wore a neon HOA vest, clipboard in hand, and had a pair of binoculars swinging from her neck like she was birdwatching or casing the joint. My dogs were barking like mad. When I approached, she didn't flinch, just smiled like we were old friends. "Good morning. I'm with the Willowbrook HOA. I noticed your bridge from the eastern path and had some concerns." I raised an eyebrow. "You're standing on private land. Armed private land, I might add." She gestured toward the bridge. "Well, it's a bit of an eyesore, don't you think? Some of the residents have mentioned it ruins the view from the community gardens, and frankly, it looks unstable." I laughed. Not politely. "That bridge could hold a convoy, and this land isn't subject to your garden club rules." Unfazed, she scribbled something on her clipboard. "We'll be in touch. A structure that close to the HOA boundary needs to be reviewed for safety compliance." She turned and walked off like a tax inspector who'd just discovered a yacht with unpaid docking fees. That's when I knew she wasn't just a nuisance. She was the kind of person who thought authority gave her access. And I had a feeling she'd be back. About a week after our Riverside encounter, I got the first letter. Certified mail, neat HOA letterhead, and Mandy Halloran's signature at the bottom like she was some kind of suburban queen. It read like a citation: unauthorized structural encroachment, visual obstruction of common aesthetic lines, and a particularly bold claim that my bridge posed a potential safety risk to adjacent residential development. I snorted and tossed it on the kitchen table next to a 1970s topo map with the military overlay that clearly showed that bridge was mine and had been long before the first HOA homeowner ever picked granite countertops. I didn't respond. Figured silence would send the message. But with people like Mandy, silence is just an invitation. 3 days later, I found a drone buzzing low over my driveway, dipping toward the bridge like it was scanning for weak points. I let it hover for a bit, made my way to the barn and retrieved my scoped .22. Nothing lethal, just persuasive. One well-aimed shot clipped the rotor and sent it spiraling into the creek like a wounded dragonfly. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA secretary asking for the return of community surveillance property. I replied with a 2-word email, private property. But the real tipping point came the following weekend. I'd just come back from a 3-day site inspection at Fort Hood, and as I pulled into my drive, I spotted them. 5 unfamiliar cars parked just beyond the oak line near the south edge. I slowed, squinting through the windshield. There she was, Mandy, clipboard in one hand, latte in the other, surrounded by what looked like a pack of over-enthusiastic board members in matching HOA polos. One was waving a measuring tape at the riverbank. Another had a laser level aimed across my pasture. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain what in the hell you're doing on my land," I said, voice flat. Mandy turned with a smile that screamed, "Oh, we're just helping." "Routine boundary verification," she chirped. "We're establishing whether your structure is partially within the Willowbrook HOA sightline zone." "There's no such thing as a sightline zone. This isn't Disney World, and this isn't your land," I snapped. One of her tag-alongs piped up, trying to sound helpful. "Technically, any structure visible from a designated community viewpoint may qualify for architectural review under Section 4C of our bylaws." I walked up until I was close enough to see the sweat forming above his eyebrows. "Do your bylaws override the Texas State Property Code?" He didn't answer. I turned to Mandy. "Get off my land. Now. Next time you want to go sightseeing, buy a ticket like everyone else." They backed off slowly, but I could feel it. This wasn't over. Mandy hadn't just stumbled over some curiosity on a walk. She'd found a target, and people like her don't rest until they've painted over anything they don't understand. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the river slip past under moonlight, I caught myself staring at that bridge a little longer. The steel beams reflected faintly in the water. It was more than structure. It was line in the sand. And Mandy Halloran had just kicked dust all over it. There's a point when curiosity turns to surveillance, and surveillance turns into trespass. With Mandy Halloran, that point came fast, and it came with propellers. It was a Thursday morning when I heard the buzz. Not the kind that comes from bees or far-off tractors. This was sharper, higher, mechanical. I was on my front porch, boots kicked up on the railing, sipping coffee and reading a field report from Fort Bliss. And there it was, slicing through the sky above the oak line, a quad-blade drone hovering like a vulture over my southern ridge. At first, I watched in silence. I figured maybe it was a real estate agent scoping a property line. Then it pivoted, directly over my bridge. The thing dropped lower, slowly, like it knew exactly what it was looking for. I set down my mug. 10 seconds passed. 20. It drifted closer, then banked and hovered right above the river, camera visibly mounted underneath. I could practically hear Mandy's voice narrating through the lens. "As you can see, this dangerous and unsightly bridge clearly violates the suburban harmony outlined in Section 4C9 of the Visual Uniformity Charter." That was enough. I went inside and grabbed my favorite tool for neighborhood relations, a Browning Lever Action 22, nothing that'd make a mess, but more than enough to swat an airborne mosquito with a superiority complex. I stepped back outside, squinting into the morning sun. The drone was now turning slowly, its little red eye blinking like it was taunting me. "Well," I muttered, "let's give the HOA something to review." I took one breath, leveled the rifle, and squeezed. Pop! The shot cracked through the quiet air, sharp, clean. A puff of plastic sparked mid-air. One rotor seized. The drone jerked, spun out like a drunk bat, and spiraled downward with all the grace of a tipped garbage can. Splash! It hit the creek just upstream from the bridge, kicking up water and vanishing beneath the surface like a broken toy. I stood there for a second, satisfied in a way only a man who just shot down flying bureaucracy can be. About 3 hours later, I got an email. Subject: urgent. Violation of community surveillance equipment. Sender: HOA Secretary. On behalf of President Halloran. Mr. Rivers, it has come to our attention that our licensed HOA observation drone has been damaged while conducting a visual inspection flight over the community's border zone. We request immediate return of the device and an explanation of this incident. Please be advised that tampering with HOA property may result in civil action. I replied with a photo of the creek. Just the creek. No caption, no drone. Just water and trees and a reflection of a bridge still standing. No response. But that was the day I realized the gloves were off. They weren't just complaining now. They were monitoring me, documenting, building a case in their twisted little HOA minds. And if Mandy thought she could outmaneuver me with drones and bylaws, she was about to learn what happens when you poke a man who has clearance and a scoped rifle. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was war. I'd been gone less than 72 hours. A quick trip to a classified site just outside Sierra Blanca, routine infrastructure consultation, one of those blacktop over desert jobs. I've left my land before. Hell, I've been deployed for 6 months at a time. But something in my gut twisted as I turned off the highway toward home that Sunday afternoon. The kind of gut feeling you get when the hairs on your arms start talking before your brain does. The gate was open, not broken. Open. That was the first sign. Second, tire tracks, not mine, not anyone I'd authorized. Deep, aggressive tread marks clawed into the earth, leading from the front path down toward the river, like someone had dragged half a damn construction site across my land. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I rounded the slope and saw it. Or rather, didn't. The bridge. The damn bridge was gone. Where once stood the arched steel backbone of the Red Dagger corridor, there was now a mangled ruin. Girders cut mid-beam, one side hanging like a snapped limb. The opposite end was nothing but churned up soil and exposed rebar. Chunks of concrete lay scattered across the riverbank. One support had been clean sliced, clean, like someone had taken a buzzsaw to government hardware. I slammed the brakes, gravel spitting under the tires. I got out of the truck and just stood there, wind hitting my face, watching years of structural engineering and federal clearance lie in ruin like a broken toy in a sandbox. At first, I couldn't even speak. My brain rejected it, like it couldn't compute what my eyes were feeding it. This wasn't some busted fence or vandalized shed. This was a registered military logistical structure, a bridge whose design was approved by Army Corps engineers, which had cost more than some suburban houses to build and maintain. And it was gone. My boots sunk into the soft dirt as I walked closer, heart hammering. There were still construction flags sticking out of the ground. Orange marked WBH, Development. A pile of unused gravel sat to the side, with a half-crushed lunch cooler still bearing the HOA logo. I stared down at the devastation and whispered, more to myself than to anyone, she actually did it. She, Mandy Halloran. There was no one else. No contractor would take out a reinforced bridge without being told it was legal. No crew would move equipment that deep into private property unless someone told them they had authority. And Mandy... well, she thought HOA power outranked the Constitution. Of course she did. But this was beyond petty, beyond vindictive. This was felony-level stupid. That's when fury kicked in. Real fury. Not the annoyed grunt of a man who gets another HOA notice on his windshield, but the cold, blood-pounding clarity of someone whose entire world just got violated. She didn't just trespass, she didn't just poke the bear, she firebombed the den. My mind snapped into gear. I unlocked the secure cabinet in my truck, pulled out my emergency contact sat phone, and hit the direct line I never use unless it's damn near apocalyptic. Within 20 minutes, I was patched into the Department of Defense Infrastructure Risk Division. I gave my name, my clearance code, and the phrase they never expect to hear in domestic calls. Compromised logistics corridor. Civilian interference. Structure destroyed. The line went dead silent. Then the voice returned, sharper, faster. Repeat, asset has been removed from operable condition. Bridge is down, I confirmed. Unknown contractor, likely misled. Authorization presumed fraudulent. Stay on site, the agent ordered. Secure perimeter. Teams inbound. By nightfall, my land looked like a scene out of a Tom Clancy novel. Federal agents, military engineers, 2 unmarked black SUVs, and a drone team scanning the wreckage. No one spoke loud. Everything was documented. Photos, soil samples, chain of custody logs. And me. I just stood there, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. Watching them walk the riverbank, I realized something profound. Mandy didn't just destroy a bridge. She detonated her own life. And didn't even know it yet. The thing about federal infrastructure is, it's not like knocking over a mailbox. You don't just bulldoze a logistics asset and get a warning letter. You kick a hornet's nest wired to satellites, subpoenas, and entire government departments that don't use voicemail because they never miss a call. By the following morning, my property looked like the Pentagon had grown legs and marched south. There were military engineers, 2 black Suburbans, a mobile command post, and a guy named Agent Cresswell in a charcoal suit who didn't blink once during our entire conversation. I'd worked with field agents before, the kind that inspect structures before classified convoys run through foreign terrain. Cresswell had that same expression, dead calm and 2 seconds from escalation. He stepped carefully over the bent rebar at the river's edge, knelt down, examined the torn support column, and murmured. Explosives weren't used. This was mechanical, sheared, probably by industrial saw or hydraulic cutter. One of the techs held up a bagged piece of orange plastic with HOA branding. Cresswell took it, turned to me, and said it like he was narrating a war crime. Local HOA took out a federal logistics node. Unbelievable. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every minute Mandy Halloran was still sipping Starbucks in her pastel subdivision, reality was sharpening its blade. Around noon, a second convoy arrived, this time DoD Legal Affairs and a liaison from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They weren't subtle. 3 field tents went up. A perimeter was taped off. I heard phrases like Category 5 violation, Section 18 breach, and full-scale investigation under Title 10. Let me tell you something. When a U.S. Army colonel walks onto your ranch with 2 federal prosecutors and a rolled-up site map, the temperature drops 20 degrees. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a national security event. I was sitting under my porch when one of the younger agents approached me with a folder. Mr. Rivers, just to confirm, this bridge was registered under Red Dagger Protocol Route 17B. Yes, I said. Approved, renewed, and operational. He nodded, flipping through documents. We pulled the records. You're right. Which means, he looked up, half incredulous. Someone just severed a federal fallback route used in joint force mobilization drills because they thought it was an eyesore? I could only smile grimly. She said it ruined the view. His face twitched. It wasn't quite a laugh, more like the kind of noise someone makes when trying not to scream in disbelief. By sundown, a case file thicker than a phone book had already been drafted. The federal team had mapped everything. GPS log tire tracks, debris angle analysis, chain of custody on the contractor's permits. Turns out the construction crew Mandy hired was a landscape company from 2 counties over, hired through a cash-based subcontract, no official documentation, no permit requests, no structural review. Just an off-the-books order with an inflated invoice, signed with a forged HOA board vote. Worse, she had used HOA reserve funds to pay for the demo, meaning every single member of Willowbrook was about to find out their HOA dues financed a felony. And just like that, Mandy Halloran's name stopped being an annoyance. It became evidence. Agent Cresswell turned to me near the riverbank, arms folded, face like granite. We've seen local interference before, zoning issues, land disputes, but I've never had to investigate an HOA for destruction of a federal route. She's going to face charges that were written for saboteurs and infrastructure terrorists. He paused, then added, We're fast-tracking this. Full criminal referral. And we'd like your testimony when it's time. I gave a slow nod, never breaking eye contact. Gladly. In the span of a day, Mandy had gone from nosy suburban enforcer to the unwitting star of an active federal case. And the best part? She had no idea yet. She probably thought she'd handled the rogue rancher and cleared the path for her dream of perfectly symmetrical riverfront views. But now she wasn't just wrong, she was history in the making. You know it's serious when they bring a podium to the courthouse steps. By the time Mandy Halloran was arraigned, the story had already made the evening news. Not just local, CNN, Fox, even a sarcastic segment on The Daily Show. The headlines wrote themselves. Texas HOA president destroys secret military bridge. Logistics sabotage via landscaping crew. Federal convoy route taken out by suburban activist in pastel blazer. The internet had a field day. Memes exploded. Mandy's face photoshopped onto Godzilla stomping a bridge or onto the cover of Homeowners Gone Wild. She was viral before she even stepped inside the courtroom. And I was sitting front row. The trial was held in the federal courthouse in Austin. High ceilings, marble floors, and enough reporters outside to make it look like a celebrity scandal. But this wasn't some tabloid drama. This was a full-scale federal prosecution for destruction of protected infrastructure, fraud, misuse of association funds, and obstruction of military operations. Multiple felony counts. Mandy entered wearing a beige pantsuit and the face of a woman who still thought this was all some kind of misunderstanding. Her lawyer, a high-priced defense attorney out of Dallas, tried to open with the usual song and dance. My client had no knowledge. She was misinformed. This was all an unfortunate zoning confusion. That's when the prosecution hit play. On the main screen, the jury watched footage taken from a soldier's body cam 2 years ago. A nighttime convoy crossing my bridge, lowlights flickering, tires thumping over steel, the whole scene under blackout discipline. The prosecutor stood and said simply, "This was a classified training operation. The bridge was essential to its success. It is now rubble." Next, they showed drone footage, not mine, government footage, mapping the demolition with timestamp overlays. Then came the contractor's recorded statement, saying Mandy told him it was an old, unauthorized ranch relic, not worth saving. Then the forged permits. Then the financial trail. HOA dues funneled into a shell vendor she controlled. Everything. And when my turn came, I stood with my boots planted and told them the truth. How I built that bridge under clearance, how it served a national purpose, how I warned Mandy she was overstepping, and how, in her delusion of control, she ignored every boundary, legal, moral, and literal, until it all came crashing down. Across the aisle, Mandy stared at me like a ghost watching her own funeral. When the verdict came, it was swift and thunderous. Guilty on all counts. 5 years in federal prison, permanent disqualification from any civic office. A $2 million penalty levied against the Willowbrook HOA, triggering emergency community hearings, and a full leadership purge. The judge's closing statement echoed like a cannon blast. This court does not tolerate private egos interfering with national security. Homeowners associations are not governments. And this bridge was not yours to touch. As I walked down the courthouse steps, flanked by journalists firing off questions, I saw the same young agent from my ranch standing in the distance, arms crossed, nodding once. I nodded back. And just like that, the woman who tried to remove my bridge had burned her own, behind her, ahead of her, and beneath her feet. 6 months later, the bridge stood taller than ever. Literally. Rebuilt with upgraded steel, reinforced pylons, flood-resistant design, and a few extra features the engineers didn't bother explaining. I just nodded when they mentioned embedded motion sensors and classified-grade concrete. Didn't need to ask, but my favorite upgrade, the sign, custom-made, bolted into a titanium base, lettering engraved in military stencil font with a bold red border, private land, strategic infrastructure, trespassers will meet special forces, and my lawyers. And just below that, in smaller script, HOA attempts will be treated as comedy. Tourists, yes, tourists, came to see it. Apparently, the case had become a landmark legal precedent, and people were stopping by for selfies next to the infamous Karen Bridge, as locals now called it. Someone even tried to add it to Google Maps as National Logistics Zone Drawer 69. I didn't object, but the real highlight, the BBQ. Every summer I host one, a tradition my dad started back in the 80s when this place was just pastures and fences. But this year was something else. I called it the Freedom from Overreach Cookout. We had banners, hats, even t-shirts with Mandy's face cartoonishly sketched next to a crumbling bridge with the caption, "I saw a problem, then became it." I smoked 4 briskets, a dozen racks of ribs, and half a hog. Folks came from 3 counties, Army buddies, ranchers, even a few ex-Willowbrook residents, freshly HOA-free after voting to dissolve the entire association in the wake of the lawsuit. One of them, Dale, former treasurer, handed me a 6-pack and said, "You didn't just take down Mandy. You gave the rest of us the courage to stop pretending we liked the bake sale committee dictating paint colors." We clinked bottles. Later that night, I stood on the new bridge with a paper plate full of ribs and watched the river shimmer under the string lights. Someone cranked up Johnny Cash on the portable speakers. Kids ran through the field chasing fireflies. In the distance, the old HOA clubhouse stood dark and silent, abandoned, sold off to cover legal fees. Poetic. And for one surreal moment, I caught myself laughing. Because that's the thing no one ever expects. When someone comes to tear down your world in the name of order, and they wind up bulldozing themselves into a courtroom. And history. Mandy? Last I heard, she was writing a memoir from minimum security. Working title? Rebuilding Bridges. My Journey from Leadership to Litigation. I might even buy a copy just to leave a 1-star review and write, should have stayed off my land. The war was over, the bridge was stronger, the sign was clear, and next to it, on a small wooden bench facing the river, I had one last plaque installed. Sometimes a bridge connects, and sometimes it reminds you where not to step. Then I bit into a rib, raised my beer to the moonlit sky, and whispered, to the next Karen, bring drones, I've upgraded.